and the Romans ever done for us.
Ho ho ho, and welcome to this most festive of podcasts because, let's face it, what evokes thoughts of Santa, presents and festive cheer more than a podcast which looks at STIs and contraception in antiquity? Just remember, you can't spell festive without STI. As ever, I will remind you all that there's a veritable trove of merriment on my website, that's ancientblogger.com, where you can find articles and links to my Instagram and Facebook. There's even a link to my YouTube channel where you can see my perfect radio features in all their glory. Finally, and most obviously, I'm on Twitter, @ancientblogger, so come and say hi. In this podcast, we're going to discuss which STIs may have existed in antiquity. If you read some of my tweets in the run-up to this, you might be expecting something on surgery and the hygiene of Roman baths as well. In fairness, time got the best of us. I will get something covering surgery and bathing in the future. Now, before we go any further, it's worth considering the topic in hand. Whilst there's no swearing, as with all my podcasts, we will be discussing some quite salacious topics and medical terminology which will cause the odd stifled giggle, and rightly so too. If you're parents and you have young kids, probably not a good one for them. If they're above the age of consent and you want them to put them off sex permanently, then pipe this into their room immediately. Now, I did say we because I have with me Emma, who you will remember from the Halloween double bill. Hello again, Emma. Allow me to start with a question. Why are you here, and have you brought any mince pies?
I'll answer the easiest question first, and that's I have bought mince pies. I carry them around with me all of the time in December. Very important thing to do. Hopefully you'll like them.
Be prepared.
The reason I'm here is to talk about sexually transmitted infections, which is one of my favourite topics, which may or may not make me sound a bit strange. I've got a degree in biomedical science and I'm doing a master's in infectious diseases at the moment. I'm also a science educator, so I suppose you could say I'm a bit of a disease expert. So
this is the sort of thing that you will talk to your students about, or it will come up in some way with classes you teach?
Yeah, I do try and shoehorn in sexually transmitted infections wherever I can.
Who doesn't?
I teach 16 to 19 year olds.
These aren't primary kids.
No, although
ABC. No,
of course not. But I will say, having had a little listen to your introduction, that it's okay to talk to your kids about sex and sex education if they're under the age of consent, particularly when it comes to sexually transmitted infections, because sometimes people don't follow the law.
I was just trying to be funny, and then you just picked me up and just said, right, that's not good.
Yeah, I had my teacher head on very much.
Fair enough. No, it is an important point though. Not being a parent, I don't know.
No, I mean, we're not going to get into the debate about when children or young adults should start sex education, but I think, that's obviously down to the parents, but it is also a good thing for people to be aware of
information,
sexual health.
Informed decisions are always good decisions, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think perhaps we can leave it with that.
Follow the law, but it's good to know some exciting things.
So the idea behind this is, I'm unsure, if you haven't listened to our Halloween podcast that we did, then I'm disappointed and a bit sad. Emma was on that purely from the premise of being a bit of a Halloween horror nerd.
Yeah.
You liked the horror films, and I thought it would be quite interesting to talk about that. And we talked about the ancient history, ghost stories and stuff like that.
And those of you who might have who listened a couple of times to those episodes, and why wouldn't you, would have noticed that I did mention something about how much I like diseases.
Yeah, you did. I think it's particularly with the zombie.
Yes.
With the zombie. Anyway, we'll leave that one be, as it were. The idea then is that I have a knowledge, you can call it that, on ancient history and things pertaining to ancient history. And obviously Emma's got the knowledge when it comes to the disease side of things. And what we've done is effectively looked around, picked out some of the STIs that seem to have been evidenced in antiquity. I don't know much about them, and Emma's obviously going to be able to cover the scientific part of it. I'm going to be able to cover other parts of it, and I think it's just a case of taking it. And then we're going to talk about contraception. So in the first part, I suppose really we should give a bit of an overview that it is really quite difficult to diagnose a lot of these diseases and STIs that exist in antiquity, simply because there wasn't the science at that time to be able to make specific diagnoses of them. I did want to ask this, because I don't know this, and I imagine quite a few people listening will probably not know it either. STIs and STDs. I know there's a difference because they're called different things. I just want to know what the difference was between them.
Okay, STIs and STDs tend to get used interchangeably quite a lot, but they're not exactly the same thing. STI stands for sexually transmitted infection, and STD stands for sexually transmitted disease. Now, we have to go back to looking at the difference between an infection and disease.
Right.
An infection is basically the entry and the multiplication of a pathogen in your body. A pathogen is some kind of microorganism that can cause a disease or that can go on to cause a disease. So a virus, a bacteria, a fungus. Again, without going too much into the science of it, viruses more so are generally linked with disease, but bacteria and fungi can be perfectly normal, natural things that can occur in or on a human without causing any problems at all. So a pathogen is something that causes a problem. Whereas disease is the disruption of a body function or structure caused by the pathogen.
Right.
So it's kind of a continuation. You get an infection and then it can progress into a disease.
Oh, okay, gotcha, yeah.
The moment you start having signs and symptoms of something, it's a labelled disease.
Right, okay.
So now you can begin to see that with sexually transmitted infections, a lot of them are symptomless.
Yeah.
And we'll go into those. And so an STI is an infection that hasn't developed into a disease yet. So
Okay.
a perfect example would be HPV, which I think we are going to look at. Yeah, human papillomavirus, which causes genital warts. You can get human papillomavirus, HPV. There are lots of different types. We'll talk about it later. And you can have it and not know you've got it. So that would be an STI. If it then develops and causes other problems, and certain strains of HPV have been linked to cervical cancer, then it is an STD.
Okay.
So you can have an infection without getting a disease in terms of sexually transmitted things, but you can't get a sexually transmitted disease without having had the infection first. So really, infection is about the pathogen gaining entry into your body and trying to take hold. Your immune system might deal with it. You might find out you've got it and take some drugs and it'll go, in which case it remains an infection. But once it's taken hold and starts causing problems and changes within the body, that's when it becomes a disease.
And we're going to start with the first, I don't know if it's an STI, STD, you can tell me, that is in for discussion. That is gonorrhea. And the thing I learned about gonorrhea straight away is how I can't spell gonorrhea, which, again, we'll come to in a bit, I suppose. But Emma, if you can just give us an idea of what gonorrhea is, how it presents itself, all the fun facts.
Fun facts about gonorrhea. I want to start by saying that gonorrhea is my favourite STI, which sounds like a strange thing to have. But it
doesn't sound, it is.
From an epidemiological perspective and from the way the bacteria works and the way what it does to the body and the way it multiplies and stuff, I just find it fascinating. But this isn't a microbiology podcast, so I won't go into that. Okay, so as I've already said, it's a bacterial infection, and the name of the bacteria, and this is where I end up butchering Latin, so I apologise because I'm sure there are people who are listening to this that speak Latin far better than I do. But its name is Neisseria gonorrhoeae. I can't even say that. Gonorrhoeae, excuse me. And I'll just call it the gonorrhea bacteria.
Yeah, gonorrhea.
It's a bit easier. And it only occurs in humans, no other animals.
Really? Which
sounds like a strange thing to say, but there are a lot of STIs where there is some kind of animal equivalent.
Yeah.
But with gonorrhea, there isn't one. It occurs through direct transmissions, that's person to person, and it generally is sexual contact. There is also vertical transmission, and all of the STIs and STDs we're looking at today do also have a vertical transmission.
That sounds like something you'd find in a car.
No, not quite. It means it's mother to baby.
Oh, okay. So it can go through the placenta?
Not always. Huh. Usually mother to baby is at birth.
Right. Oh, okay, yeah.
Because of the mess that is birth. No offence to anyone.
Beautiful mess.
The beautiful mess that is birth, yeah. So yeah, gonorrhea can occur vertically from mother to baby. Most diseases involving the genitals can, although we will see later there are some that can cross the placenta. Oh. But
look forward to that.
Some can't cross the placenta. It all depends on the type of pathogen it is. So yeah, mostly, like I said, unprotected sexual contact. The interesting thing about gonorrhea is the statistics surrounding the transmission of it differs between men having sex with women and women having sex with men. I don't have any stats for men having sex with men, so we're just looking at the transmission from a man to a woman or a woman to a man. I imagine man to man is going to be similar from man to woman, but in terms of the chance of infection, if you have unprotected sex once with somebody who's infected, if you're a woman, you have unprotected sex with a man who's infected, you're 50% likely to get the disease. The infection immediately. And by that I mean you haven't got to have multiple
occasions.
I was going to say sessions, which probably isn't the correct term, but yeah, multiple sexual is one sexual contact, piece of contact. Dalliance, thank you. I'm not very good at this kind of couching of the words. Whereas transmission from a infected woman to a man is 20%.
Oh, okay. So it's so blokes, if I was infected, I'm far more likely to give it to a woman.
Yes.
Than I am if I had sex with a woman who was infected and I wasn't. And we weren't using condoms. Yeah,
it's all about unprotected sex. Right. It can be passed if you're asymptomatic, which means if you haven't got any symptoms at all as well. Most STIs are passed whether you've got symptoms or whether you're aware of having it or not. In fact, pretty much all of them are. I think some of them are more virulent, which means it's easier to catch it if you're showing symptoms. The entry of the bacteria is actually through mucosal membranes. So that is the vagina, the urethral mucosa of the penis, that's the hole down the middle of the penis, and also the anal mucosa. And so assuming that if there is any kind of anal sex, and once again I'm not assuming that man-to-man sex is always that, because it isn't, and also man-to-woman sex isn't always that, because it isn't, but that increases the risk as well, because the vaginal mucosa and the anal mucosa tends to get more damaged during sexual intercourse, whichever type, than the penis does. The urethra of the penis doesn't tend to get damaged during sexual intercourse, but anything that it's going into, the mucosa is quite a delicate part of the body. Not in a painful way, it's just the way the body is. It's just it sheds cells quite easily, can get damaged, and by damage we don't mean scary damage, we just mean natural wear and tear.
Right. You can take your mince pies back.
So the infection, once it gets into the mucosa, whichever mucosa it is excuse me, usually localised, but it can get into the bloodstream and spread elsewhere, and that's something that's called systemic gonorrhea, but that is quite rare. People don't tend to get systemic gonorrhea unless they've got some kind of immunity problem, be it being on immunosuppressants or having some kind of immunity disease. There are plenty of them. But once you've got gonorrhea, which hopefully won't happen to anyone listening.
I've gone and I've had a dalliance.
An unprotected dalliance with an infected person.
Yeah, yes. With an infected person. So how long?
Symptoms tend to develop within 2 to 7 days, so it's quite quick.
And those are calendar days. That's not work days. This thing doesn't take the weekend off.
It does not.
It's 24/7.
It is 24/7, all day, every day, and all night, of course. With men, it's urethral discharge and pain upon urination.
Okay.
There can be some local complications. They would occur a little bit later, which would be epididymitis, which is the inflammation of the tubes that take the sperm from the testicles to the penis. I do like the word epididymitis. Quick aside, if you ever hear the word itis at the end of any kind of diagnoses, it tends to mean the swelling of something.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that comes back from a Latin root, possibly. We could have a look at it at some point. But so tonsillitis, for example, is the swelling of your tonsils. Appendicitis is the inflammation of the appendix, and so on. That will come up a few times, so that's why I'm pointing that out. In women, there's vaginal discharge, but 50% of women are asymptomatic, so they don't know they've got it. So that's pretty bad. Untreated, it can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, chronic pelvic pain in women, and infertility, because
is that across both men and women, infertility, or is
no, I was just about to say it's the fallopian tubes that are damaged.
Okay.
The epididymitis could, in theory, if it got really bad, cause infertility in men, but bearing in mind how sensitive the testicles are, you probably know that you had it, and you'd go to the doctor. Whereas our fallopian tubes, those women out there who do have fallopian tubes, will we don't have that many nerve endings in them, so they can get gnarled as you like, and you just don't know about it. You can also get gonorrhea in your throat, your eyes, and your rectum.
Hell of a weekend.
The rectum will have your normal discharge. Your throat, you'll just have a sore throat. So, because although the throat does have mucosal membrane in it, it's not the sort of mucosal membrane that tends to cause discharge unless you've got a very severe infection. And the eye is swollen and there's a bit of discharge, there's a bit of edema in the eye. The vertical transmission from mother to child of gonorrhea causes an eye issue in the baby. I'm trying to remember what the name of that is. It's called ophthalmia neonatorum, which again sounds like a name of somebody.
Yeah, it does.
But it's not. But that's a specific. I'm laughing. It's not funny because that's a specific horrible thing that can occur to a baby who may get gonorrhea bacteria in their eyes during the birth, from the birth canal. So that's not very nice. And just to finish it off, there is a rare systemic spread of gonorrhea, like I've said before, which can cause skin lesions, endocarditis, which is to do with some heart stuff. I'm not going to go into that too much, and arthritis as well. So gonorrhea systemically, or getting it and it not being treated and it going to be systemic, which it doesn't always do. It can just remain localised.
If you've caught it, then it gets to a point where is that continual? So if
it becomes a chronic condition. Chronic conditions are ones that just stay in your body doing stuff.
Right. Okay.
It will likely remain localised. I mean, the thing is, because penicillin can get rid of gonorrhea, apart from super gonorrhea, which is developing at the moment, which I'm very excited about, but it's not so exciting.
The Avengers film, isn't it?
No, super gonorrhea is antibiotic resistant strains of gonorrhea. But generally, we don't have much knowledge of what happens when gonorrhea goes untreated,
right?
Particularly not in the developed world.
Right. Okay.
So it's possible that in the time we're looking at, it could have been more likely for it to become systemic.
Okay.
And the systemic spread can cause other problems, which can then go on to lead to death. But it's you're dying with gonorrhea rather than of gonorrhea, and that gonorrhea might have caused a problem with your heart.
Right. Yeah.
That may have caused a heart attack or heart disease or something, but it's not the gonorrhea. It's the damage caused by the gonorrhea that would then go on to kill you. So technically, it's not the gonorrhea that's killing you. It just didn't help.
Well, thank you very much. Do you want to hear about instances from history?
I do, yes.
Of gonorrhea. I found this book online, and if you ever looked at books online, sometimes you can look a couple of pages, and then you really want to buy that book, and then you look at the price of the book, and you think, no, I can't. And this is one such instance. There's a really good book out there called Diagnosis in Assyrian and Babylonian Medicine. It's by Joanne Scurlock and Burton Anderson. It's the University of Illinois Press. And it looks really good, and I was able to read a couple of pages. I wish I could afford the book. There's a couple of inscriptions from Assyrian and Babylonian. I couldn't get the exact date on these, so I do apologise, because I usually like to say. Anyway, there's a couple of texts or inscriptions, and one of them was, if a person's penis stings him, he lets his semen fall when he urinates. It goes on, pus continually flows from his penis. And therefore I thought, discharge, because we were talking about symptoms that you can almost put a pin in the map and go, this is possibly...
That does sound like gonorrhea. I quite like the poetic bit about the semen flowing to the ground or whatever it was. But
well, that's funny enough. We will get to the name gonorrhea, why it was called gonorrhea. So we've got that, and after that point, we can go a bit. Well, we're going to go Old Testament, literally Old Testament, because there seem to be a couple of instances in the Old Testament where STIs, or certainly sexual disease, is referenced, and there's a number of discussions on it, which if you want to go online, more than obviously welcome to do so and look them up. The first of which is in Numbers 31, and Moses is particularly angry with the officers of an army who have just won a victory and brought back a load of cattle and the women from the army they defeated, which was standard practice. All women who had lain with men he executed, but he said, you've got to spare the virgins and the children. All the soldiers who had, it says, touched any of the slain, take that as what you want, they had to be purified. Everything that can stand fire shall pass through it, also purified with water as well. So there seemed to be a massive amount of cleansing going on. And it's a very difficult one, because when you follow the tribes of Israel and their sort of exploits, as it were, integration with other tribes, people, and that sort of thing can end up with visitations of plague or disease, and it's seen as sort of godly judgment upon as a punishment for doing that. I'm not an expert in the Old Testament. I'm sure there are instances where that's not the case, but this is from what I've been reading, and it seems that here we've got almost a quarantine from any kind of sexual involvement. Anyone?
Yeah.
More interestingly, I'm going to go. This is my favourite.
Can I just say something about that one though?
Go on.
I'm frowning, which you may or not be able to hear, but I wonder why they slay all the women, but the soldiers who've been friends with the women, or whatever the lovely way they couch it, can be purified. That seems a bit mean to me.
Well, yeah, I think that it was. There's a lot of. Well, we will see this. See there's a lot of purification, cleaning. Now, you can argue that's purification from what we'd consider a medical sense, or you can see it as a religious rite.
Right. Okay.
And I think in a lot of instances, the two are very meshed together. Okay. One informs the other. Now, Numbers 25, which starts with possibly my favourite sentence in the Old Testament. While Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. It's a great new band, Daughters of Moab.
I quite like to live in Shittim, to be honest with you.
But anyway, again, there was a reference there to a venereal disease.
I just wanted to pick something up you said about the movement of tribes. That's quite an interesting one, particularly I imagine further back in the day, that the immunity of people does develop as there's integration between different countries and different communities. And so I do think that if you've got a new set of people being presented to another set of people, it is possible.
Fresh as flu. In a really, really, really...
yeah, okay. I was going to go into some really lovely science there, but no, fresh as flu just explains it probably better than my science ramblings would have been.
The final instance of this, and I think this is the most sound. If you heard those other examples and you thought, not totally convinced by that, fair enough. This one, I think, is quite profound. And this is the Old Testament section, which is always, or has been, whenever I've looked this up, this is the one that's strongly referenced to gonorrhea.
Okay.
And it's Leviticus 15, and it's the Lord speaking with Moses and Aaron. When any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean, and this is the law of his uncleanliness for a discharge. Whether his body runs with a discharge or body is blocked up by his discharge, it is uncleanliness. Discharge and uncleanliness.
Use that word a lot there.
Now, every bed upon which the discharge lies shall be unclean, and everything on which he sits shall be unclean. There was also, it then goes on and it follows a similar pattern, saying things that are unclean, anything that's been used, food, so food items, bowls and things like that, and people that person may have touched or been in relation with. Everything's required, everything needs to be cleaned, washed. They have 7 days of effectively what is quarantine. They have to be, I suppose, symptomless for about 7 days before they're considered clean again. And then it says, if a man has an emission of semen, he should bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until the evening. And this is the same with women. And if they both lie together, then they're both considered unclean. And it's this idea, and we'll see this with gonorrhea, that the discharge could often be, I suppose, incorrectly diagnosed as semen, which is where you get the name from.
Yeah.
Galen, in the, I suppose, 2nd century AD, coined the term, and it comes from gonos, which is semen, and roia, which is flow, because he thought that it was sort of basically uncontrolled flow of semen.
It's interesting that you say about roia being uncontrolled flow, because obviously everyone's heard of diarrhea.
Yeah.
So that's where that comes from. What I thought was interesting, again, bringing a bit of science into it, is the idea of clothes and everything being unclean. Just to make it clear to anyone who doesn't know a huge amount about the gonorrhea bacteria, it dries out really, really quickly when it's not in the body. So if you have got some discharge that then dries, if you will, or sits around for a while.
Is it infectious? Is that...
No.
So if, for example...
It needs to be fresh body fluids.
Okay.
For example, if there was some discharge and it was left out for a bit, it would dry. Quite a lot of your sexually transmitted infections don't survive too well outside of the body, apart from the ones that live and thrive on skin rather than in mucosal membranes. But mucosal membranes are mucosal, they are moist. Sorry, I know a lot of people don't like that word. There is a lot of lubrication in the mucosa, whether we're talking about the genitals or we're talking about the rectum or the throat. So when they are outside of the body and not in a moist environment, they won't survive.
Right, okay.
And body fluids can only last so long being a wet environment outside of the body.
It's quite I would say, advanced consideration of disease and sanitation.
Oh, absolutely.
Infected people. Not the idea being that it's not just you that could be infected. It's your items, it's things you might have used, and how that came about we don't know. In either case, I think it's quite a forward-thinking view. And I just want to finish up. There was a chap called Celsus who was writing the 1st century AD. Interestingly enough, he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a surgeon, but he catalogued a lot of the what to do ifs and cures and all. And there's some quite interesting stuff there. He reported on gonorrhea as being a complaint about the genitals and excessive outflow of semen. And that's in his book 4. His remedies for this: rubbing, swimming in cold water, no hot food, and avoid sleeping on your back. You're shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see you. You know.
And I did think, because I asked you about how easy it was spread, and one of the things we were going to do, we were going to talk about Roman baths and how unhygienic they really were. And this would have informed part of that, because there were cold baths, there would have been cold water there. If I've got gonorrhea and I'm swimming in cold water, and I've got discharge, and you're being encouraged to go and do that, other people are sharing that water space. Is there a good chance?
I mean, it depends how cold the water is, but at the same time, like I said, you've got to have disrupted mucosal membranes. So swimming around in cold water, unless you are forcibly placing that cold water, and I mean forcibly, into yourself, then it's not. And even then, if it's cold, the bacteria won't dry out, but they are quite delicate. I mean, again, that's not something that we don't look about how gonorrhea bacteria survives in cold water, but bearing in mind people who have gonorrhea aren't advised not to go swimming or that kind of thing, or they're not advised, to not share towels or things like that.
But in short, it's not something that is going to cause. It's not going to spread a great deal in the population unless you're sexually active.
Absolutely.
In the population.
I mean, at the end of the day, our skin is a fantastic barrier against things, and you could have the infected discharge on your skin, directly on your skin, and it wouldn't.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I've got some with me right now.
You'd have to know. In order for you to have some, you're making an admission about yourself that probably isn't true.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Unless there's a man in another room or a woman in another room with the gonorrhea that you're going to bring out.
The internet's a big place, Anyway, well, we've done that. So we've looked at gonorrhea. So we can say, I think we've got, with the evidence there, I think we can say that gonorrhea was something which was in occurrence in Antiquity.
Absolutely.
It seems that you've got, from the sort of early second millennium BC right the way through till 2nd century AD, you've got references to it.
Yes, definitely. And I scoff at the remedies and stuff, but some of the things they came up with through either luck or judgment were true. And as we've already said, there was no germ theory then. And so it's easy to laugh at the ideas of cold baths and no hot food, but...
Well, it's what I think was difficult with it, because Hippocrates, I looked up Hippocrates. It's difficult to know whether I think he does reference it a few times, but again, there seems to be a difficulty in separating this from urethritis, which we'll come to a bit later, because it's often, he seems to position it as an acute form of urethritis, which gives us an idea of how things weren't seen as necessarily being separate.
Well, I'm not going to go into urethritis yet, because we'll talk about that later, but I will say anything that's mentioning any kind of discharge, the chances are it is gonorrhea rather than anything else. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Emma. That was informative. We're going to look next at herpes. And we'll be back in a couple seconds, so join us for herpes fun. Herpes is the next one up. Hippocrates coined the word, and it comes from the verb to creep or crawl, and we'll get to why that is. As we did with the first one, the gonorrhea, I think, Emma, it's a pretty good idea for you to give an overview of what herpes is.
I will. Herpes is a virus, and because viruses were discovered much later than bacteria, it doesn't have a name that I need to butcher. Viruses don't have lovely, beautiful names. So this is just called the herpes simplex virus, or HSV. There are several types of herpes simplex virus that are around, not all of them associated with sexual transmission. So we're going to look at the two that are. There's the herpes virus 1. I'm just going to call it the herpes virus, by the way, rather than the herpes simplex virus. The herpes virus 1 is the one that most people are aware of because it causes a cold sore.
Right.
So your common cold sore on your mouth, that is obviously oral. It can be transmitted sexually, but it's not the main one that's transmitted sexually.
Right.
Herpes simplex virus 2, HSV2, is the most common cause of genital herpes. It is actually one of the most common sexually transmitted infections in the world. Over 500 million people have got or carry herpes simplex virus 2. And globally, most people are unaware of their infection because it doesn't tend to show itself.
Right.
What is interesting to me as a scientist is that herpes virus 2 infection can result with can cause you to have a twice as likely risk of developing HIV. That's down to the mucosal membranes that I talked about before. They've become ulcerated. So HSV2 infection interacts really interestingly with HIV from a microbiological perspective. I won't go into it now, but they kind of work with each other, which is an interesting thing. If you're into your microbiology, it's worth looking into that. So the transmission is sex, contact with genital surfaces, skin, sores, or fluids of infected people. That's different from gonorrhea because gonorrhea is very much a body fluid transmission. Okay. Whereas with herpes, it is contact with genital surfaces, and because of that, you can't always protect yourself against it by using condoms. Unless you've got, and it always makes you think of Naked Gun, where they wear giant condoms. Yeah. Unless you've got a condom that covers your entire skin surface. So that's why most people, or a lot of people have it and don't know about it, is because they assume that condoms can protect against them. Condoms do offer partial protection. Also, another thing that tends to be one of these misconceptions is that herpes is you're only able to catch it if you are exhibiting symptoms. And that isn't the case. I think with herpes simplex 1, the oral one, the normal cold sore, that is the case, or it's more the case. But in terms of sexual contact, the herpes simplex virus 2, you don't have to be exhibiting symptoms.
So at any point, if you've got it, then you can transmit it.
Yeah, you're far, far more likely to transmit it if you are showing.
But it's not. Yeah.
No. And the symptoms, which I haven't mentioned yet, but I've kind of allied to them, are ulcerating vesicles, which also sounds quite nice.
Great, another great band.
Just great band name. They are basically just ulcers on the genitals.
Right.
Tends to occur 3 to 7 days after infection. So you will get ulcerating lesions when you catch it, if you catch it. The vesicle then breaks down. So you get kind of little bumpy little vesicles first, much like a cold sore. Anyone who's ever had a cold sore, it's kind of a bit bumpy initially. Then the vesicles break down and that causes an ulcer, and the ulcers are very painful and shallow. So they're not very deep ulcers. So quite similar, I suppose, to mouth ulcers, which mouth ulcers have nothing to do with herpes simplex virus generally. I'm sure there are probably some types of mouth ulcers that are caused by that, but mouth ulcers are a different thing. You also get localised lymph node swelling, fever, headache and malaise. You can get that. And if the lesions are on the urethra, and they will tend to be more likely to be on the urethra of a man than a woman due to the length of the urethra, you get pain on peeing, which we saw before.
Right, yeah.
Which is quite interesting. Healing will take up to 2 weeks. And this is what's quite fascinating about the virus, is that it will travel up your sensory nerve and it establishes a latent infection, which is just... A latent infection is when it's there but it's not doing anything. It's just sort of sitting there. Viruses like to do that. They like to just sort of hang around for ages not doing anything.
Lazy things.
They're clever though. But yeah, they sit in the dorsal root ganglion nerve, sits there, and then it can reactivate at any time. Sometimes times of low immunity, so that's the link back to HIV.
Well, you say about
again.
cold sores, whenever you see the adverts, it's all about people who are stressed or under the weather, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So yeah, it can then reactivate itself, and it travels down the nerves that it came up to the same area that it was infected, and causes recurrent lesions.
So there's no set pattern. You could have, and I'm talking about both ends of the body here, you could get it and you can have the vesicles and the pain, and then it goes away, and then it could come back in a month's time, 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Once you've got it...
Which is quite terrifying, given the fact that when we looked at gonorrhea, that was something that was continually presenting itself.
Yeah, more or less.
And so you were very much flagged aware that you had it. Whereas this one, and again, perhaps in times of antiquity, you may consider yourself cured.
Yeah.
You took some of the horrible things I'm going to read out they did to you, and you'd say that worked because it's gone.
Yeah, and because it doesn't last very long, the initial infection, and it's not something that sits there all of the time. So yeah, it is also another one that can be transferred from mother and baby vertically. They call that neonatal disseminated herpes, and it can also cause encephalitis as well. It can be quite serious in newborns. So it's something that if you have, I don't know if they do it in this country, but I know in some American states they test women for herpes to see if they've got it if they are pregnant, because you want to make sure that you're not expressing symptoms, because you are far more likely to pass it on to your child. But
well, my sister's had kids, so I'm going to ask her at the
she's got herpes.
Christmas dinner table.
I'm sure she'll love
awkward
that.
Chat. I'll just throw it out there past the stuffing. Have you been tested for herpes?
And why not if you haven't?
I'll do it. Why not?
But rare complications of herpes can include aseptic meningitis and encephalitis as well.
This is what you were talking about earlier when you said about causing disease elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it won't shock you to know that this was picked up.
No, it's very, I mean, if you compare it to gonorrhea, okay, gonorrhea says a little bit of discharge and it's not very nice, but your body would, that's the other thing we didn't mention actually, your body might be able to deal with it. You wouldn't necessarily have a chronic condition forever. Our immune systems are quite good at dealing with bacteria, so it's possible that you could get gonorrhea and you could survive it and your body could clear yourself of it. So it wouldn't necessarily be a chronic condition, it could be acute. But with herpes, your body can't really deal with it. Okay.
Well, I mentioned the book earlier, that Diagnosis in Assyrian and Babylonian Medicine, and there is as a section in there is an inscription which reads, the translation obviously reads, if the nature of the sore is that it is hot, like a burn, and contains fluid, it is called bubu tu, which sounds cute.
Does sound
but it
cute.
obviously isn't, and that does sound like what you were describing of E-school. Yeah, so there was something called the Ebers Papyrus, which date to around the sort of mid-16th century BC, and it deals with a number of diseases, solutions, ancient Egypt, in case you hadn't worked that out, and case 818 references ulcers on female genitalia, and they seem to... More than that, it's really going sort of internal as well. And and that's something that has been picked up. And again, we say identified. We don't have the diagnostic equipment. We don't have a TARDIS. We don't have diagnostic equipment, etc., etc. However, this seems to... We could probably place this kind of disease within the herpes kind of...
I mean, there are. We will look at. There are other STIs that cause ulceration, but if it's several ulcers, I mean, it's difficult to know. But I think it does sound more like herpes.
Hippocrates, who coined the term, he coined the term because he said it spread so quickly. That's what it means.
It's very contagious.
Herpes. He said about it was. I think the verb is herapin, or herpin. I don't speak ancient Greek, so apologies. I've just destroyed anyone's confidence in me about ancient Greek. He references boils, ulcerations around the groins. Around the groin. His solution for this was frankincense of myrrh. Yes, that's festive reference too. Frankincense of myrrh soaked in sweet wine and applied as a kind of poultice. And apparently, frankincense of myrrh are both... They've got qualities within them that are very good at antiseptic qualities, agents, which would help bring that down slightly. I don't think it's going to make a huge amount of difference, but it's not going to agitate it.
No, but you can have a topical ointment or such that would make things more comfortable for you. So it's a treatment, I guess, because it vanishes back up the nerve and then goes away. That would look like it had cured it.
Yeah.
And I imagine, I don't know a huge amount about frankincense and myrrh, but if it is soothing to ulcers, and for open wounds on your genitals is going to be painful, so anything that makes you feel better. But
we do have Celsus, who I mentioned earlier, in book 5. He describes pustules with crust, which spread quickly. And that sounds pretty much...
The word crust really upsets me. I'm
he
usually okay with this
these.
kind of thing, but that's just gross.
And he says the patient often has a fever at the same time, and they can be quite sleepy.
Yeah, we always said about malaise.
Malaise, you did say about that. His cure?
Tell me.
Cauterization. And in case you don't know what that is, Emma, what is cauterization?
Cauterization is the application of intense heat to a wound so that it doesn't...
Burn them off.
Yeah, burning it off, basically. I mean, the thing is, I pull a face, but we do use lasers to treat certain things, which is a kind of modern cauterization. I mean, you don't do it for genital ulcers. You don't do it for herpes. You do it for genital warts, which I think we're going to come to later. The thought of having something that is already very painful and open as a wound being cauterized, so you've got something very hot and painful going onto something on your skin, on your sensitive skin, that is very open and painful. It just sounds like it would be...
It doesn't sound at all pleasant.
No.
But I can tell you, I know someone who knew someone who had herpes, and that's Pliny the Younger.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Pliny the Younger, for most of you, particularly if you're students and you're studying and you've come across Pliny for the first time, you're probably familiar with Pliny the Younger as being that guy who wrote loads of really uninteresting letters to Trajan asking about putting things up in streets. However, in book 6 of his letters, number 24, he writes a letter to Calpurnius Macer, and it includes the following. I was sailing on our Lake Como with an elderly friend when he pointed out to a house with a bedroom built out over the lake. From there, he said, a woman of our town once threw herself with her husband. I asked why. The husband had long been suffering from ulcers in the private parts, and his wife insisted upon seeing them, promising that no one would give him a more candid opinion whether the disease was curable. She saw that there was no hope and urged him to take his life. She went with him, even led him to his death herself, and forced him to follow her example by roping herself to him and jumping into the lake.
Kids, don't kill yourself if you've got an STI.
I should. This is not. Don't take Pliny's advice. So it seemed there, breaking it down, that an elderly chap, had really painful. Oh, did he say painful? I'm just going to double check.
I think he did.
Yeah, suffering from ulcers, had long been suffering. So this is someone who possibly had herpes. A man who's married, he's had herpes. His wife doesn't seem to have them, or wants to know what's going on. Says, I'm going to have a look. Has a look, and then goes, uh-oh, and then says, that's it. It's over for both of us. Now, could it be because she realised that because he's got them, she's going to get them too? We're inside the mind
it's possible. To be honest, if they've been married for a while, she would have them. It depends whether they're still sexually active with each other, I suppose, but it may well be that they're just not as obvious. If they are somewhat internal, she might have had them and just got used to the pain, like us women do.
It's quite. I know we did this in our Halloween episode. How dark things can get.
Yeah.
You don't. If you're on a lake with a friend, that's where someone jumped to their death.
I don't know what kind of friends you have. That sounds like exactly the sort of conversations I'd have with people.
On a boat in a lake, I don't know. But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting. By Pliny's standards, I think that's really interesting. It beats yet another letter about setting up an aqueduct somewhere or doing something for Trajan.
And it definitely does sound like herpes.
Yeah.
If it's continuous sores like that.
Well, he's obviously been suffering for a long time. Or presumably had been.
And again, they go away and they come back and they go away and they come back. So, and I'm presuming that potentially back in those days, immunity wasn't necessarily, or living conditions weren't as good as they are now. And potentially if your immune system's low, then they are more likely to reoccur.
I wonder if he'd also heard about Celsus, the cure.
Oh, yeah.
It was like, jump or be cauterized.
What a choice.
Fun.
So we've decided to make this into a two-parter because I can't shut up about sexually transmitted infections and diseases. So this is the end of our first part. Thank you very much for letting me join you and talk about my favourite subject.
I'd say a pleasure, but I feel a bit ill.
Yeah, it's also probably quite a good place for you to stop, go and get a cup of tea, perhaps watch something trashy on Netflix to cleanse your mind.
Netflix and chill, but genuinely just Netflix.
Yeah, no chilling.
Chill.
If you do chill, don't forget to use a condom.
Infamy! Infamy! They've all got it in for